and we'll be starting in just a second. I just wanted to go over some rules and advice. You don't have to have your camera on if you don't want to. This will be recorded, so if you miss something, if you're trying to take notes, or if you want to recommend someone else see this, just know that this will be made available soon. Later at our on our website, along with all the other presentations. Please mute your microphone, and if you have a comment, a question, please either raise your hand virtually or use the chat box. My colleague Susan Botley is going to be monitoring that, so I will pause for any of that type of stuff. And I guess that's it. Probably a lot of I'm sure a lot of us are already used to the Zoom protocols, right? But nonetheless, some of us may not be, so that's why we have this slide. Yeah, let's start. Once again, hello. Welcome to our program. My name is José Aranda. I work in the library at Doña Ana Community College. If you did not know, we are affiliated with NMSU. Very often we do these types of presentations, not necessarily on this topic, but we do several presentations. We have been ever since the pandemic. And so we have a website where we store all the videos and all our presentations and so forth. So we're glad you joined us. This seems to be an interest. This seems to be a topic of interest. We had a lot of interest. So I just want to preface this, though, that I am not an expert. I am a librarian, and I also have a master's in public history from NMSU, but I am not claiming to be an expert. This is an orientation, an introduction, if you will. If you want to speak to the experts, the history department has them. One in particular, his name is Professor Nathan Brooks. His specialty is Russian history. So I just wanted to start the presentation with that claim. So, and in the short time that we're going to be together, I'm only going to touch on certain things, right, about the association of Ukraine and Russia for those of us that don't know. And so this presentation is not meant to dive into, right, the real details of specific history. This is an overview. This is an introduction. So before I begin, I just wanted to let you know about our library's contact information on this slide. You should find that up on the right-hand corner, our phone numbers and websites and emails, and as well as my personal email, or work email, I should say, down there at the bottom. So Ukraine and Russia, history of tension. These are in overview, the main objectives that I'm going to touch upon about this presentation. And before I go on, I do want to highlight that Susan, my colleague, Susan Botley, is posting in the chat box various links and will be doing so throughout the presentation. I mentioned about these presentations that are recorded are located in our website, and that website link has been posted in the chat box, and they're called Live Guides. It's a product. I know some people find that word funny, but that's what they're called. Basically, they're websites that the library creates and we put a lot of information on there, and we try to make those live guides very topic oriented or very specific. So check out those links when you get a chance. And like I said, this presentation will be recorded, and when it's made available, it will find itself there as well. And then the other link that Susan posted is our library's homepage, DACC library. So these are the objectives that I intend to cover. This notion between USSR and how it used to look maybe 40 years ago compared to what it's looking like now, and what some believe are the motivations for the current war that we're experiencing today over there. I'm going to talk about this family of languages and culture, shared culture of the region, and then the political independence of Ukraine. And then I'll go into some specific areas that I think are interesting, and that is going to be the major exports, imports of Ukraine. You may have heard of a couple of things already in the news about it. I'll talk about the Chernobyl disaster of 40 years ago, and Crimea and in today's war. So those are the objectives I intend to cover today. Again, I want to say this again, I am not an expert in Russian history. I am simply a librarian who has a deep interest in history in general, but I felt that the current events of today's war in Ukraine calls for a presentation like this for those that desire it. But there is a Russian specialist at NMSU. His name is Professor Nathan Brooks. So I don't mind sharing my age. I'm 50 years old. I'll be 51 next month. And so I graduated high school in '89, and then I went on to college. This is a picture of a map of the book that I used in college. And it was a geography class. So back then, the Soviet Union was in existence. That's what USSR means. Russia is a part of was a part of the USSR, and sometimes people use those two terms interchangeably, right? USSR, what it was back then compared to what it is today. So we need to keep this in mind, that the borders have changed throughout history. They have never remained stagnant. It has never been just Russia by itself. So from this textbook that I just told you about in my college days, gives you an overview of the regions of the entire USSR, in case you didn't know, and I could be mistaken, but I don't think so, that Russia is the largest country in the world, geographically speaking, landmass. And this picture highlights it. I mean, just look at the enormity of it. It is both part of Russia, it is both part of Europe, the western side, and Asia, the eastern side. So I thought this is a good map, good picture to start off, just to give us context of what we're about to discover. But I want to go into this Indo-European family of languages. And again, I am not an expert in this area. I had to do research on this, and I'm sure many of you can find similar information online or in your library about this. My point of this is to illustrate that this area, because of its history throughout the millennia, it's very, you need to keep in mind, you should keep in mind, the political boundaries did not always exist. And so these families of languages really, I think, paint the picture of this whole area, and actually of any area of the world, right? We need to keep in mind the peoples of the past and how they are related. And so this, again, this map kind of gives you an idea of the languages, both the Slavic languages and non-Slavic languages. So let me just read you a little bit about the Slavic languages. So the Slavs are a member of the most numerous ethnic and linguistic body of the peoples in Europe. They reside chiefly in the eastern and southeastern part of Europe, but they extend also all the way to Asia and the Pacific Ocean. Slavic languages belong to the Indo-European family. Customarily, Slavs are subdivided into the East, West, and South. The East Slavs chiefly are the Russians, Ukrainian, and Belarusians. The Western Slavs are the Poles from Poland, Czechs from Czechoslovakia, the Slovaks, the Wends, and the Sorbs. And then the South are the Serbs, the Croats, the Bosnians, the Slovenes, the Macedonians, and the Montenegrins. Bulgarians, though mixed of origin, like the Hungarians, speak a Slavic language and are often designated as Southern Slavic. In religion, the Slavs traditionally are divided between the two major churches of the Eastern Orthodox, and those mainly include the Russians and most Ukrainians and most Belarusians and most Serbs and Macedonians, and those associated versus those associated with the Roman Catholic Church, which include primarily the Poles, the Czechs, the Slavs, the Croats, the Slovenes, some Ukrainians, and some Belarusians. The division is further marked by the use of the Cyrillic alphabet. The next slide, we'll talk more about that. So their language, their alphabet is very similar because they do use the Latin alphabet, but they have their own, the Cyrillic, I believe I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's called the Cyrillic alphabet. But then there's also a lot of minority groups, particularly religious groups such as the Muslims, the Protestants, and the Jews. And in recent times, communist government officials' encouragement of atheism, together with a general trend toward secularism, have eroded the membership in these traditional faiths. So again, some context to provide that we need to be careful when we just say, okay, an Ukrainian, a Russian, a Pole, this whole area is a mixture. Can you imagine the migrations and the interchanges and the changes of governments and those in power and the wars? It's a mixture, it really is. I think I think the whole world is, but especially this area. So that's what I meant to provide to you through this slide. So as you can read here, the vast majority of people in Ukraine, they speak Ukrainian. It's a written form of the Cyrillic language, right? Language belonging with Russian and Belarusians to the East Slavic branch of the Slavic language family is closely related to Russian, but also has distinct similarities to the Polish language. Significant number of people in the country speak Polish, Yiddish, Russian, Belarusian, Romanian, Moldovan, Bulgarian, Crimean, Turkish, or Hungarian. Russian is the most important minority language. During the rule of Imperial Russia under the Soviet Union, I forgot to mention that first slide, the USSR collapsed in the early 90s. But before that, right, the rule of Imperial Russia under the Soviet Union, Russian was the common language of the government and public life, especially in Ukraine. So thus that could complicate a layperson's understanding of what we're trying to understand, of what we're trying to explain here, right? There's a lot of overlap. So although Ukrainians had been afforded equal status with Russia in the decades following the revolution of 1917, by the 30s, a concerted attempt at Russification was well underway. And by 1989, Ukraine once again became the country's official language, and its status as the sole official language was confirmed in 1996 by its constitution. So a lot of shared history, a lot of shared culture, and of course, language and politics. So it's a mixture of a lot of these. So in 1918, Ukraine declares independence from Russia, but it is still part of USSR. What in essence this treaty did was it granted Ukraine an important, if not the, I would say one of the most important areas of what was then the USSR, independence from Russian control. I hope to explain to you by the end of this presentation why. Besides the political boundaries, perhaps that one may obviously conclude why the war is going on, i.e. they want that piece of land, they want to extend the territory. There are other reasons intrinsic to why Ukraine is very key for the history of this region and for its obviously independence, but also in its association with Russia. And I hope this slide demonstrates that for you. But officially in 1991, Ukraine declared Ukraine declared independence. So I think this is important. You know, you may hear otherwise through the internet, through propaganda, etc., that Ukraine was never independent, that Ukraine always belonged to Russia. I beg to differ, and this slide, I hope, provides a point in that argument that they did and were independent as of 1991. Some of you may remember 8 years ago, I do, President Obama was in office, and all of a sudden Russia under Vladimir Putin took over Crimea. It is that section in the southern part of this map that you see there. It is a strategic peninsula, I believe one would call that, or at least an extension of the mainland because of its location, right on the Black Sea. So again, the reasons that the Kremlin are using today for this special military exercise, right, are many. And I hope this slide can help provide some context. But there are both ethnic as well as political conflicts in the area. So it's very complex to understand. It is not black and white. So that's what I hope you get from this slide. And because it's not black and white, its cultural history is not black and white. So again, like I said already, right, we need to be very mindful of the political boundaries because its cultural history predates them. So this slide here kind of tells you a little bit about its cultural history, and one could only imagine, you know, the exchanges and the things I've mentioned already, that the mixture of people in its history and culture and language, etc. And with the political boundaries changing and regions and section becoming independent and so forth, it can be confusing. It really can. So we need to keep that in mind. So this map here kind of illustrates a comparison between the modern boundaries, political boundaries versus the historical regions. So I find it very interesting. But now we're going to go into why is Ukraine so important? You know, yes, there's some history there, definitely some history there, going back to the USSR's domination of the region, but there's also economic and agricultural, for example, reasons that make Ukraine very important. You may have heard this mentioned in the media already, right? That they are the world's breadbasket. So this graph illustrates Ukraine's exports. So that light blue on the left side of that circle, the 52.8%, is other. And I take that to mean they're feeding the world. You know, they are exporting, they export, and I think it's mostly wheat and many other minerals to the whole world. They feed the world because of their agriculture. So I think this slide explains that it's not just to Russia and it's not just to Europe, it's to the whole world. But they also import from global sources as well. So I find that interesting that Russia is not its biggest importer. You know, I think in both slides it wasn't. So again, food for thought. It's another piece to the puzzle, right? You know, when you hear the argument about, and I'm switching back and forth, excuse me, from the previous slide, that Russia is not its main importer, exporter. Ukraine has really become a global player as far as these two slides are concerned. Let me pause right now. Are there any questions or are there any comments? Okay. And I will proceed. A little, this graph here is just to tell you that in the majority of Ukraine is urban. And if you were watching the news 3-4 months ago before the war, I know I was, a lot of these cities that unfortunately are either heavily damaged or practically non-existing anymore were very urban. You know, they had sophisticated transportation and commercial. They look like a modern city, global modern city. So this slide explains that almost 70% of Ukraine is urban. So, but of course, its rural component is very important, as I've already mentioned, right? It's agriculture. It's a big part of it as well. So in '86, a nuclear power plant exploded. I don't know exactly what happened. They call it the Chernobyl accident. I remember that, and it's still a major concern. There were attacks on it when this war started. So this is a big concern for a lot of us, particularly in regards to the environment, right? Most of us probably know that the radiation from a nuclear power plant does not stay where it does not stay if it leaks out. So the winds carry it, and so that should be a big concern for everyone, especially in war, right? I think special consideration should be given, and I don't know if it is or if it was, but for those of you that maybe were not born yet or did not know, yes, Chernobyl is in Ukraine, and it is a big concern on how they do not take care of that area and those power plants. And I'm sure it's not the only one. I'm sure there's several others. So again, another piece to the puzzle of why we should be concerned about this war, in my opinion, at least. So again, this presentation is meant to present an overview, but it's also an invitation for you to seek credible sources that the library has on this topic. So Chernobyl, nuclear power plant accidents, etc., can be a subtopic for one to further explore from this presentation. And we invite you. I will shortly show you some of the items we have in the library. So let me read this for you about the Chernobyl. During the Soviet period, rapid industrialization, intensive farming, and a lack of effective pollution controls combined to seriously degrade the environment in Ukraine. Some of the most polluted areas in the world are there. In 1986, an accident happened at the Chernobyl power plant, and it created a severe environmental problem in northwest Ukraine. Vast areas of lands are still contaminated by dangerous short and long-lived radioactive isotopes. And they give you that scientific name, strontium-90, which can replace calcium in food and become concentrated in bones and teeth. Very serious, very serious. And it can contaminate the agricultural lands as well. So, said several thousand premature deaths from cancer are expected over the long term. So can you imagine if this is not of concern for both parties, primarily for Russia, the aggressor in this war, that the catastrophes, if they're not careful, can spread through all of Europe, Asia, maybe even North Africa. Who knows? Very scary situation. So let me talk about the people and the ethnic groups of Ukraine. When Ukraine was part of Russia, when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, a policy of Russian in-migration and Ukrainian out-migration was in effect, and ethnic Ukrainian share of the population in Ukraine declined by 77% from 1959 to 73% in 1991. But that trend reversed after the country gained independence, and by the turn of the 21st century, ethnic Ukrainians made up more than 3/4 of the population. Russians continue to be the largest minority, though they now constitute less than 1/5 of the population. The remainder of the population includes Belarusians, Moldovians, Bulgarians, Poles, Hungarians, Romanians, Roma, and other groups. The Crimean Tatars, who were forcibly deported to Uzbekistan and other Central Asian republics in 1944, began returning to the area in 1989. And by the early 21st part of the century, they constituted one of the largest non-Russian minority groups. And in March of 2014, Russia, I have already mentioned this, right, annexed Crimea, a move that was condemned and by the international community, and human rights groups subsequently documented a series of repressive measures that had been taken against the Crimean Tatars by Russian authorities. So you may have heard in the news recently about how some people that are captured, both, and I'm primarily talking about non-military personnel, right? The citizens, the residents of certain areas in Ukraine, because of this war, are being moved, shipped to other areas in the interior of Russia. It is precisely because the objective, I think, is to erase a lot of this ethnic individuality, right? This uniqueness of peoples that made up Ukraine. Because if you erase people's history, if you normalize just one language and prevent the others, you see what that does, right? It very easily then, in this example, in this instance, then the power of Russia could then claim we're all one. You know, it was just Russia taking over. It's long last part from the past, but in reality, that's not true. In reality, I think what I'm trying to say with this slide is that there are individual peoples and ethnic groups in the entire region, especially in Ukraine, that deserve to be identified and respected. And so we need to keep that in mind of the aggression, of what consequences this aggression is doing to them. So this map is 20 years old, but the point of it is to illustrate that Ukraine by itself had several cities. I've already talked about how urban they were, right? 70% almost, but they had several cities. I would say maybe a half a dozen here with over 1 million residents. So this notion of, okay, it's just this piece of land that used to belong to the USSR and they're really part of Russia. It's just, you know, whatever happened, we need to fix that. No. Ukraine is an independent. Ukraine has its own history. Ukraine has several different types of people that make up Ukraine, and so this slide, I hope, illustrates that it also had several urban, modern cities with several million inhabitants. So we need to keep that in mind of its authenticity, right? So let me stop here. Are there any questions? Are there any comments? We're almost towards the end. These presentations are short, under 30 minutes. No. Okay. Well, oh, we do.
Hi, my name is Boris, an associate professor in mechanical engineering department at MSU. I just wanted to make a few comments, and thank you very much for the presentation, first of all. I'm from Ukraine myself, and I wanted to point out a few things that I thought were important. I understand the presentation was short, so you weren't able to touch upon everything, but let me say this. First of all, I think what was missing is the very early history of the region. And again, I understand the presentation is short. Specifically, I'm talking about the Kievan Rus, which is a country that was established in the 10th century with the capital around the region of modern Ukraine, and the capital was in the capital of Ukraine, Kiev. At that time, and for another couple of centuries, Russia was not even in design. There was no such country as Russia, and basically where Moscow is now, for hundreds of years after Kievan Rus was established, there was basically a swamp. So the whole idea about denying Ukrainian independence and the right to exist as a country is objectively laughable.
Yes.
And basically, in the beginning, in February this year, when Putin declared special military operation, in quotes, which is basically, so to speak, for war, he said that Ukraine basically was a made-up country that was created by Lenin, which is, of course, false on so many levels. In addition to denying the right for Ukraine as a country to exist, Russia has been claiming that Ukrainian language is not a language and simply a dialect of Russian, which is also not true, of course. They are demonstrably different languages. You mentioned the Chernobyl power plant disaster. I also wanted to mention that during the first weeks of the war, there was shelling and occupation, and I believe occupation is still active, of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. And it's much larger than Chernobyl. And in the beginning, Russians were actually shelling the nuclear power plant. So there was, a pretty big scare of another nuclear catastrophe happening again. You mentioned the attempts to raise the uniqueness of people by forcefully evacuating them into Russia, actually Far East Russia, so that they wouldn't be able to come back easily. They did the same with Crimean Tatars in the middle of the last century. And they're doing the same with Ukrainians right now, specifically from the regions of the south and east. By definition, this is nothing else than genocide. So they're trying to raise Ukrainian people and forcefully remove them, destroy the culture, raise the language. You mentioned Russification. This was a huge deal, of course, in the last century. And obviously killing and raping as they occupy the territory. So all of this amounts to genocide. It's pretty clear and simple. There is no hint of a special military operation, of course. This is open war, land grab, and genocide. So I don't want to take a lot of time, but I just wanted to mention a few things that I thought were important. Thank you.
Oh, very much appreciated, Professor. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I didn't mention that word, but it is genocide. And I appreciate your contributions. Anyone else? I see that there's a posting in the chat. Someone's recommending the book. And that's almost my last slide, is I'm going to mention some of the items we have in our collection, but we welcome suggestions, definitely. So please look at the chat for a recommendation by Gene Olson on The Red Famines, Stalin's War on Ukraine. And it's available at the public library. That's great. Thanks for letting us know that. Letty has a question. Why was there no consequence regarding Crimea? I'll see if the professor wants to answer that. I have an opinion, but I think the professor would. Professor, would you please attempt?
Again, I can offer my opinion, but this may not necessarily be something that experts agree with. But I think one of the reasons is Russia managed very successfully to project this image of a basically of a successor of the Soviet Union in terms of military strength, economic strength, and so on. But well, a questionable comment about economic strength, but at least in the terms of military strength. And of course, during this war, we see how false that image was, how corrupt the Russian military is. But anyway, they still have nukes, right? So a lot of people are actually afraid of, provoking Russia and provoking a world war. That's one thing. Another thing, Europe, which is, if we're talking about no consequences from the United States, then Europe is a huge ally, of course, of the United States, and it's enormously dependent on Russian energy, gas imports, oil imports, and this is pretty much the main reason why there was some initial hesitancy in terms of the response to the Crimean occupation and in the beginning to the war, full-on war in Ukraine. And the third, that may not necessarily be a reason, but justification for inadequate response to Crimean occupation is that there was this narrative that Crimea was not really a part of Ukraine in the first place, right? Because there were a lot of ethnic Russians, there was a large military base that was leased by Russia from Ukraine, and so on, so on, so on. And then there was a mention of the referendum, which was completely bogus, which did not include an option to stay in Ukraine in the first place. There was only one option: do you want to become part of Russia? The referendum completely was boycotted by Crimean Tatars, which were the majority until the middle of the last century, 1950s. Also was, a lot of them were evacuated by Russian. It's the referendum happened during occupation by Russian military forces, which was actively being denied by Russia at the time, which was completely surreal. So a couple of these reasons, and the world was like, okay, maybe let's let Putin have this one. Of course, this led to what happened this year. And this what happens when you try and appease bullies like Putin. And Putin is a giant bully in the first place.
Wow, excellent. And she says, thank you. Great. Any others? Any other questions before we conclude? Yes, there's one more. Please put up the library. Okay, yes, that's good. That's my last slide. So here are a few examples of what we have in the collection. Just keep in mind that Doña Ana Community College, like I mentioned at the beginning, we are affiliated with NMSU, so we share the same catalog. So when you are in the catalog, and if you need help with that, please let us know. We're here to help. You need to keep in mind when you find an item, such as any of these books, where it's located. So for example, the ones on the left-hand side, they all belong here where I am at, the East Mesa campus, because it tells you there, right? But the ones on the right, at least the one in the middle on the right, the one that about Catherine the Great, is in Carlsbad. Carlsbad and Alamogordo and Grants are part of the NMSU system, so one can borrow items from those places as well. So this is not an extensive list of everything that we have. These are just a few examples that I thought I wanted to share with you about both Ukrainian and Russian history. I see several chats. Let's see here. Oh, no. As we're concluding, my colleague Susan Bontley is putting reminders for you about our contact information, the library's website. This concludes my presentation. I want to thank our special guest, Professor Druck. I never claim to be an expert. I am simply one who sympathizes for what's going on. And as someone whose hobby includes history, I knew there were a lot of historical inaccuracies that were being used in the propaganda that the professor already highlighted. So I'm very grateful for his participation in this. And so here's my bibliography. If any of you would like any further assistance from us, here is our contact slide with various formats of getting a hold of us. Remember, we are here to help, and we're all part of one university. In conclusion, I've talked about some of the regions and concepts of the former USSR, the very important association of both the culture, the history, and especially the languages, and the minority populations, right? We cannot paint this region with one brush, okay? The political independence of the region and the country of Ukraine, its economy, the misfortune of the Chernobyl, but as the professor mentioned, also the other nuclear power plants in the area and how they may be used as a weapon, unfortunately. And we've talked about Crimea and a little bit about today's world. This is more of a background of what's going on, right? This was not an attempt to summarize everything that's in the news or even about the war itself. Some more chat there, thank yous. Yes, so we hoped this provided what you expected. If it did not, please reach out to us or to the professor or the other, the Russian specialist at NMSU, Professor Nathan Brooks. But I do invite you for our next presentation in a couple of weeks. Next month, July 6th at 1 p.m., we will give a presentation on personal finance resources. Again, thank you very much for joining us. It was our pleasure. I wish you well. Until next time. Oh, I'm sorry. If you do me a favor, do us all a favor. We're all in assessment, right? We want to assess how we do. We want to improve. Please fill out the survey provided to you on this slide, on that link, to let us know how we did, how we could improve, and also to give us recommendations for future topics. This idea is several parts, right? We want to educate, but we also want to invite you to the library and to introduce you to incredible resources we think we may have on those topics. But if we receive recommendations, suggestions on your behalf, we will definitely take those into consideration. So please consider spending, I think it's not even a minute. I think there's 4 or 5 questions. Fill out this survey. We would appreciate it very much. On behalf of the Doña Ana Community College Library staff, I thank you for joining us, and until next time.
Thank you.